The collective of had conquered 17 star systems across 3 galactic arms. Their silicon-based neural networks processed information at speeds that organic minds could never match. They calculated probability matrices spanning millions of variables in mere moments. They had reduced warfare to pure mathematics, and mathematics had never failed them. When their long-range sensors detected the small blue planet in the Sol system, they analyzed its dominant species with the same cold precision they applied to everything else. Humans, carbon-based organisms with limited. Their brains operated on chemical reactions and electrical impulses that moved at embarrassingly slow speeds compared to processing power. High Commander studied the analysis reports aboard the flagship Eternal Calculation. The data streams painted a complete picture of humanity. They built machines that broke down. They created governments that collapsed. They fought wars against each other for reasons that logical explanation. Most puzzling of all, they spent enormous amounts of time and resources on activities that served no survival purpose whatsoever. "What is this?" asked his tactical advisor. He pointed to images of humans gathered in large buildings, watching other humans pretend to be different people on elevated platforms. "They call it theater," replied. "A form of organized deception where they simulate events that never happened. Our analysts classify it under their general tendency toward inefficiency. Process this information. They pretend to be things they are not. They create false realities. This is the behavior of a species that has not fully evolved. Their cognitive resources are wasted on fantasy rather than focused on practical advancement." The Command Council agreed unanimously. Human creativity was clearly a primitive trait. It was an evolutionary dead end that their species had never grown beyond. The endless generation of fiction, music, art, and imagination represented a fundamental weakness in their neural architecture. While they had evolved toward perfect logical optimization, humans remained stuck in a developmental stage where their minds wandered into useless territories. "The invasion will be simple," declared. "We will present them with a mathematically perfect strategy. They will have no counter. Their illogical minds cannot process the complexity of our approach. I calculate complete planetary surrender within 72 of their hours." The fleet entered the Sol system with absolute confidence. Their ships moved in formations that had been calculated to optimize every variable: defense, offense, resource efficiency, communication redundancy. Everything had been considered. Every outcome had been predicted. The mathematics was flawless. Earth's governments detected the approaching fleet and panic spread across the planet. Military commanders gathered in emergency sessions. Scientists worked frantically to understand the alien technology. Politicians argued about response strategies. But it was not the generals or the scientists who would determine the outcome of this conflict. In a small apartment in Seoul, a young woman named Park was playing a video game when the news broke. She paused the game and watched the footage of massive alien ships approaching Earth. Her mind immediately began racing through scenarios, not military scenarios, story scenarios. Was a writer. She had spent her entire life creating fictional worlds and imagining impossible situations. Across the world, millions of other humans did the same thing. Artists began sketching the alien ships, imagining what the creatures inside might look like. Musicians composed pieces inspired by humanity's first contact. Writers started drafting stories about the invasion. Filmmakers thought about camera angles and dramatic moments. Game designers began planning interactive experiences based on the unfolding events. They monitored all of this activity with confusion. Instead of organizing purely military responses, the humans were creating. They were imagining. They were telling stories. It was precisely the inefficient behavior the analysts had predicted. It confirmed every assessment of human weakness. But they did not understand what was actually happening. When a human writer imagines a story, they must consider every possible outcome. They must think like their characters. They must anticipate plot twists and plan for unexpected developments. They must create problems specifically so they can solve them in interesting ways. This process exercises parts of the brain that pure logic never touches. It builds neural pathways designed for impossible thinking. General Sarah stood in the emergency command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. She had spent 30 years in military service, rising through the ranks with distinction. But before she was a soldier, she was a child who loved science fiction novels. She had grown up imagining alien invasions. She had spent countless hours thinking about how humanity might respond to exactly this situation. "We cannot match their technology," her advisors told her. "We cannot match their numbers. Our calculations show no viable strategy for victory." General smiled. "Then we stop calculating." She issued an unprecedented order. She requested assistance not from military strategists but from creative professionals, writers, artists, game designers, special effects experts. Anyone who had spent their life imagining impossible scenarios was suddenly invited to help plan Earth's defense. They intercepted these communications and were baffled. The humans were consulting their entertainers in matters of warfare. This was beyond illogical. It was insane. Dismissed it as further evidence of human cognitive deficiency. Perhaps their surrender would come even faster than predicted. The Human Creative Council met virtually within hours. Thousands of imaginations connected across the globe, sharing ideas at a pace that surprised even them. They were not military experts. They did not understand weapons systems or battlefield logistics, but they understood something far more dangerous. They understood stories. "Every military strategy is a narrative," explained a veteran science fiction author. "They are telling themselves a story where they are the unstoppable conquerors and we are the primitive victims. We need to rewrite that story." A game designer named proposed what she called the glitch strategy. In video games, players often found ways to exploit unexpected bugs in the system. They discovered paths the designers never intended. They used the rules against themselves in creative ways. What if humanity approached the invasion the same way? "Their advantage is calculation," said. "They have modeled every logical response. But humans have spent thousands of years creating fictional problems and fictional solutions. We have imagined scenarios that no logical mind would ever predict. We need to become the bug in their system." The fleet arrived at Earth's orbit and immediately began their conquest protocol. They transmitted precise demands for surrender. They demonstrated their weapons capability by vaporizing an uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean. They gave humanity 24 hours to submit. Instead of responding with military force or diplomatic negotiation, humanity responded with chaos. It began with the broadcasts. Every television station, radio channel, and internet platform began transmitting fiction. Stories about alien invasions where the humans won through unexpected means. Films showing creative strategies for fighting superior enemies. Music that inspired hope and defiance. Art that depicted the in mocking and ridiculous ways. Monitored these broadcasts with growing frustration. They are wasting their final hours on entertainment. They are truly beyond salvation. But the broadcasts were not entertainment. They were psychological warfare. They were demonstrations of humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to imagine things that do not exist. General launched her first strategy. It was based on a twist from a novel published in 1988. Human ships approached the fleet in apparent surrender formations. They calculated the approach vectors and determined there was no threat. The ships were too small. Their weapons were too weak. There was nothing to fear. But the ships were not weapons. They were stages. They began performing, dancing, singing, reciting poetry, broadcasting dramatic performances directly at the vessels. The alien commanders had no response protocol for this. Their systems had not calculated for artistic assault. They were designed to counter weapons, not wonder. While they processed this inexplicable behavior, the second strategy launched. This one came from a video game concept. Human hackers had spent the past 12 hours studying communication patterns. They had noticed something the aliens never expected anyone to find. The ships used mathematics so precise that it was predictable. Their encryption was based on logical sequences. It had never occurred to them that anyone would try to introduce illogical elements. The hackers began injecting random data into systems. Not viruses, not attacks, just noise, pure creative chaos, artwork, music files, segments of comedy programs, pieces of abstract poetry that meant nothing at all. The computers attempted to process this information. They tried to find patterns. They tried to calculate meaning. But there was no meaning. It was creativity without logic. It was imagination without purpose. The systems began to slow. They were not crashing. They were simply overwhelmed by data they could not understand. The mathematics that had conquered 17 star systems could not process a surrealist painting. The neural networks that calculated probability matrices across millions of variables could not determine the meaning of a joke. Watched his fleet descend into confusion. What are they doing? What is the strategy? Calculate their intentions. His systems tried. They failed. Human creativity was not a strategy. It was the absence of strategy. It was the ability to do things for no reason at all except that they were interesting. General launched her third strategy. This was the killing blow. While they struggled to understand the chaos, human ships delivered actual weapons, but not advanced weapons, not logical weapons, weapons that no military calculation would ever predict. Fireworks, explosives designed for beauty rather than destruction. The shields were optimized for military ordnance. They deflected lasers and missiles and particle beams. But fireworks were none of these things. They were art. They were celebration. They were pure creative expression rendered in gunpowder and light. The shields did not recognize them as threats. The fireworks passed through, and attached to each beautiful explosion was a small EMP device, donated by a special effects company that normally used them for film productions. The flagship went dark. Stood in the sudden silence of his command deck. His calculations had failed. His predictions had failed. Everything he understood about conquest had failed. He had dismissed human creativity as weakness. He had seen their art and their stories and their music as evolutionary deficiencies. He had been catastrophically wrong. Creativity was not a bug in human development. It was the ultimate feature. It was the ability to imagine outcomes that did not exist. It was the power to create realities from nothing. It was the force that let humans solve problems that had never been solved because they could invent solutions that had never been invented. When the council reviewed the disaster later, they could not explain it. Every calculation had been correct. Every prediction had been accurate. By pure mathematics, they should have won. But humans did not fight with pure mathematics. They fought with stories. They fought with dreams. They fought with the accumulated imagination of a species that had spent its entire existence creating worlds that did not exist. General accepted the surrender on the deck of the disabled flagship, asked her one question before the proceedings began. How did you know what to do? How did you calculate the correct response? Thought about the question. She thought about every science fiction novel she had read as a child. She thought about every movie that had inspired her. She thought about every dream she had ever had about the stars. We did not calculate, she said. We imagined. They left the Sol system with a new understanding of the universe. Logic was powerful. Mathematics was useful. But creativity was something else entirely. It was the power to change reality itself. And any species that possessed it was not primitive at all. They were dangerous beyond measure. Humanity returned to their lives after the invasion. They went back to their theaters and their concert halls. They continued writing stories and painting pictures and composing songs. The other species of the galaxy watched with new respect and new fear. The humans were still creating. They were still imagining. And somewhere in the collective consciousness of the cosmos, a simple truth was acknowledged. Never dismiss the dreamers. Never underestimate the artists. Never assume that creativity is weakness. Because imagination is the most powerful weapon in the universe. And humanity had more of it than anyone else.